everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
Hello, and thank you all so much for joining us here today.
Yes, we've got some true crime news. I guess we'll start the show off with today.
Yes, not the news I was expecting today.
No.
But O.J. Simpson, dead at 76, was
He
it?
did, yeah.
Yeah, there's been some very funny posts out there.
Honestly, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Terrible dude. He definitely did those murders. He got away with it. He died a free man. So, I'm not upset about it.
No, and 76 is not a bad age to go at,
No.
I suppose. I guess that's all we'll say about that. But yeah, he did.
Yeah, he did. Maybe an episode we'll cover in the future, which, by the way, I got a bunch of messages on my Instagram. We talked about the missing nukes on Extra Credit last week. People really want us to cover that.
Okay, shit, yeah, then let's talk about it. I will do some research.
People got really excited when you mentioned it, and they're like, you guys gotta talk about it.
You know, it's funny because you were telling me, just as I arrived here, that today's episode is going to be a hella heavy one, and that you could really do with a break after all of this, and you deserve it also. So maybe we've got kind of something planned, but maybe we'll talk about the nukes as well.
Yeah, we've got we're about to sit down and we usually plan our show 5 episodes in advance kind of thing. So we've got one of those sit downs coming up soon. And
we do.
And with that said, if you guys have anything you want us to cover, as always, message us on all the platforms, email us, thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com. Let us know what you want us to talk about, because we usually listen.
Yeah, there is certainly never going to be a lack of topical subjects for us to cover based on the demographic of stuff that we talk about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think while ever there's going to be human beings, we'll have crime to talk about. So there is that.
Absolutely. And with that being said, this is a friendly reminder to you all that we are on social media. So if you enjoy the podcast, make sure you follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter/X, Facebook, and all of that fun stuff to check out more of our posts and get to know us better.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do a live episode premiere every single Saturday, rain or shine, and you can join us in the live chat and let us know your thoughts about the cases we cover in real time. Basically, we hang out there every week.
We do.
It's a lot of fun, so you should join.
And we're almost at 1,000 subscribers, so help us hit that 4-digit mark, if you will.
That's a big milestone.
Yeah.
Like Dina said, if you have some ideas of topics you'd like us to cover, or indeed for extra credit, if you have a news case you want us to talk about, be it modern or ancient, you can check out Patreon and get to be a part of the community.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to Mr. Manson here. Charlotte, so far, how are you feeling about the series? Honestly, I feel like it's been easy going so far.
Knowing what I do know about the case, this is not a new one to either of us by any means. We all know how this turns out in the end. It hasn't been that bad within the realm of the case I'm talking, right?
Absolutely.
Obviously, Charlie Boy had an extremely rough childhood, a lot of wild shit going on in between, but we're now kind of getting to that point where we're talking about the incident.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about really the stuff that made him so infamous to the point where we're still talking about him today.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, the later part of this episode was some of the most difficult research and writing that I've done in a long time.
I believe it.
I had to take a lot of breaks just to kind of sit there, take a minute to myself, try not to think about it, and then as I do that, I would research more and find more and look at autopsy photos. This stuff is terrible. This story, it goes from the wacky adventures of a bunch of misfits led by a dirty little man to the scene of an absolute slaughter that we're going to talk about today. So buckle up, you guys. This is not going to be an easy one to listen to.
No. So far, Charles Manson has been through many adventures. We've seen him become institutionalized to the point of begging the guards to let him stay in jail when he was released, and his time as a free man and everything in between.
Another thing we've explored is the reactions of those around Charles and their infatuation with not only him, but his entire belief system.
Yeah, he had a lot of people wrapped around his little fingers.
We left off last week with him discovering the Beatles' White Album and how it gave him the impression that a race war of apocalyptic proportions was just around the corner.
Not only that, he literally believed that the Beatles were specifically talking to him through hidden messages in their music.
And let's not forget the attempted murder of a man known as Lotzapapa, who Charles at this point still believes that he killed, which in his mind meant that the Black Panthers were now after him.
We really saw more of the dark side to the level of drugs they were all using last week. The partying is still definitely going on, but it's hot, food is scarce, tensions are high, and paranoia is even higher.
It's a recipe for disaster.
This week, we are truly entering grim territory, and with that, we are going to issue a warning for this episode.
That's right. We're going to be covering some of the crimes that made Charles Manson so famous, and they are sickening. Throughout this series, we've seen him do a lot of very questionable and concerning things, but at the end of the day, we're going to be talking about some truly evil stuff.
And while he wasn't there when the murders took place, you can argue that if these people hadn't met Charles Manson, their victims would still be alive today.
I think it's really easy to forget just how horrible these crimes are because so many people look at Charles Manson as this like wacky little character. The crime scene photos that show what the Manson family did really do haunt you because they didn't just murder, they annihilated these people. And again, it's easy to forget that when you see the female followers, especially because they're all these like little hippie girls, but the reality of it is they're all stone cold murderers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to see them as, oh, they weren't in control of their own thoughts or they were crazy, but yeah, they brutally and horrifically murdered a number of people.
There's this juxtaposition of you see them, the photos of them at the ranch, and there's just these like girls, they're sitting around, they're having a good time, to the photos of them at the trial with their heads shaved, just like sitting there looking like absolutely just wild. It's honestly, it's crazy how quickly all of this just devolves into a shitstorm.
It honestly kind of reminds me of Dracula and his brides, and how his brides are these beautiful, like haunting, seductive women, and then they like rip apart a baby. It's this craziness of, like you say, these tiny beautiful flower children having drugs and sex and all sorts of fun, and it's like, no, you brutally murdered a pregnant woman. And many others.
Yes, exactly. One of the things we talked about last week was Charles's introduction into the music industry. He met a lot of influential people, and for a little bit, it seemed like he might actually have a shot at a career as a performer.
However, he quickly wore out his welcome with many of his newfound friends when they realized that not only was Charles Manson kind of a pain, he could be extremely volatile. He had helped Dennis Wilson write some lyrics for the Beach Boys that not only did he not get paid for, he did not even get any credit.
It's reported that at one point, Charles was so angry at Dennis about this that he gave him a bullet and told him,
"I know where you live. I know where your children are."
Not so friendly anymore, is he?
No.
I think we've all met this kind of person. Like, this is obviously an extreme, but someone who's just fine until they aren't. And then it's really bad. Like, when they aren't, you are in big trouble.
No kidding. I feel like there's always that person in your life, be they a family member or like maybe an acquaintance that's kind of in your friend group, and you're like, you're a little odd and there's something not quite right about you, and you're fine right now, but maybe one day you won't be. And boy howdy, Charles was not.
Yes.
Not only was his potential music career now hitting a standstill, but things at the ranch were getting pretty dicey, to say the least. Charles had the group separate and live at different parts of the property in case of an attack. Another person who he believed wronged him during this time was Terry Melchor, who he believed stood in the way of his career.
This was around the time that Linda Kasabian joined the group.
And here's a shocker for you all. Charles describes her as a pretty little girl, which is really gross, but it's just surprising because usually he's just roasting these women's appearances.
That still kind of gets me because it's ridiculous how often he talks about their appearances in a negative way, but I thought about it. And if they had good self-esteem, they wouldn't follow him the way that they did.
That's true. I'm sure he was negging them before we knew negging as a
Oh,
thing.
for sure. He wanted to keep their confidence low because it reminds me a lot of Rock Terrio.
Yes.
And I didn't think the two would have many similarities until we got to here, but they really do have a lot in common.
I mean, aside from the humongous height difference,
Yes.
even sort of visually, they look very similar.
They do.
I don't like it at all.
No.
So, Linda Kasabian is certainly one of his better known followers, and we will get to why when we cover the trial. But she had quite the life before she met the family.
She was born to a construction worker father and stay at home mother. Times were tough for the family, and they often struggled financially. After the crimes, her mother would admit that she ignored Linda a lot as a child because there were so many other kids in the home.
As a teenager, she was described as intelligent but starry eyed. She did well in school, but conflict in her home got in the way of that, and at the age of 16, she ran away. Linda spent a few months traveling the West Coast searching for meaning and, quote unquote, looking for God.
Rather than God, she found a husband, a man by the name of Robert Peasley. The two had known each other from school, which means that this is one of the few age-appropriate relationships that we've covered throughout the series.
I mean, it is nice to hear that, but sadly, the marriage did not last, and the two divorced shortly after. In 1968, she married Robert Kasabian and gave birth to a little girl she named Tanya. That relationship didn't work out either, and she eventually returned home and lived with her mom for a bit.
One day, Robert reconnected with her and asked her to join him on a sailing trip to South America with his friend Charles Blackbeard Melton.
That sounds like very adventurous.
Doesn't it? The whole thing led to the couple giving things another shot.
She got pregnant again, but the happiness would not last. Robert left on the sailing trip without her, which caused her to feel neglected. Blackbeard had introduced her to a member of the Manson family who invited her out to the ranch.
I feel like a guy nicknamed Blackbeard is never going to be good news.
No, because I mean, the first one was a, clearly infamous and historical pirate.
Yep.
To get another nickname like that, to me, suggests something's wrong.
Yes.
According to Charles, she had originally intended it to be a short visit, but hours turned into days, and she engaged in multiple sexual encounters with the men there. She left the ranch only to get her things and break it off with her husband.
She brought along cash that she gave to Charles, as well as a huge bag of acid. And it wasn't long until he was sleeping with her himself. And he talks about this in Manson in his own words, and he says, well, all the other guys gave her a shot, and they said that she was good, so I decided to give her a shot too.
And with that, he took her to a cave on the ranch and invited two of the other ladies to join them. He talked to her about issues that she had with her stepfather, and then they all got jiggy with it.
In a fucking cave.
Again, to each their own, but good lord.
Right? So, like we mentioned before, many members of the group were involved in selling drugs. One of them was Bobby Beausoleil. One of his connections to the trade was Gary Hinman, who we mentioned briefly last week.
Gary was a known mescaline producer who often dealt to members of the family. One day, a group of bikers arrived on the ranch claiming that the drugs Bobby had sold them were poisoned, and they were rightfully angry and demanded their money back.
Bobby asked for the remainder of the drugs so he could take it back to Gary and get their money back. They told him that they had dumped the drugs because a bunch of their guys almost died from them. They then left, and Bobby immediately told Charles what had happened.
Charles phoned Gary and told him that they wanted their money back for the drugs. Gary told them that he wouldn't refund them and that they already owed him money for drugs that they had purchased. This sent Charles over the edge. He claims that at this time he looked over at one of the girls and jokingly said, "Go kill him, Sadie." He then told Bobby that it was his responsibility to handle the situation however he saw fit. He didn't care what he did as long as it got the bikers off their backs.
That evening, Bobby, Susan, and Mary went to Gary's house to come up with some sort of a solution to get the money back. Charles joined them a few hours later. In Manson, in his own words, he writes,
I said I didn't know what I was going to do once I got there, but the thought hit me. Gary's a freak behind some kind of Japanese Buddhism, so I'll take my sword along and intimidate his ass with a display of Oriental swordsmanship.
I could see him saying that.
Oh my god. When he arrived at the house, he saw clear signs of a struggle. Gary seemed relieved that he was there. He demanded the money back, and again, Gary refused him, saying he didn't have any of the cash. He claims that he then jumped at him with his sword and cut his jaw and ear.
Gary begged them all to leave. Charles told Susan and Mary to take care of his face, and then he left.
Later, he saw Gary's VW driving down the road. Bobby, Susan, and Mary got out. The women left without saying anything, but Bobby walked over to Charles and said, "Gary's dead." According to him, he had started to scream for help, and so he stabbed him until he had stopped.
One of the three, we aren't sure who because the story changes with each person, then took Gary's blood and wrote the words "political piggy" on the wall with a Black Panther symbol next to it.
That is just so fucking bizarre to me.
Right? And I mean, they wanted to, because in their minds, the Black Panthers are after them.
Which they absolutely are not.
No, they don't know who you are.
No, and the Black Panthers don't give a shit about the Manson family.
No.
They have bigger fish to fry.
Exactly. And so in their minds, they're like, okay, we're going to kill this guy since he won't give us our money back, and then we're going to frame the Black Panthers, and that's two solutions in one.
Efficiency, I guess. The family stole the VW as well as Gary's Fiat. When his body was discovered, a bulletin was put out saying the suspect would likely be driving one of the two vehicles. 2 days later, Bobby was arrested for the murder. Charles wouldn't hear about this again for a while because he was already back on the road.
This time, he encountered Stephanie Schram. It was 2 a.m. and he saw her walking out of a gas station bathroom. Charles asked her what she was doing there so late, and she pointed to a man that was in a car, indicating that she was there with her boyfriend. He asked her if that was her boyfriend and if she was having fun, to which she replied,
"Not really. He's a rube."
And then she just left her boyfriend for Charles. Okay. The two spent the night having acid-fueled sex on the beach, which resulted in her telling him she was in love and wanted to go wherever he wanted.
P.S. You guys, she's 17. Ugh. And also, FYI, later in a conversation with family member Paul Watkins, he would describe her as
2,000 years of perfect breeding.
Of all the ways to say that someone was attractive, that is fucking foul.
Foul is the best word to use to describe that because it really is. Like, that is revolting.
That just basically boils down a female human being as a piece of a cattle, basically a cow.
Yeah, I was gonna say a racehorse, but yeah, a cow.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, really.
Ugh. Charles called the family back at the ranch and heard that Bobby had taken Gary's other vehicle and had left the ranch. He still had no clue that Bobby was in jail and the prime murder suspect.
They also relayed that the police hadn't been by the ranch, which relieved Charles. He then spent the following days hanging out with Stephanie. The two woke up on August 8 and made their way back.
Something wild to remember is that Charles Manson has only been out of prison at this point for about a year and a half.
That to me is crazy because he's really done a lot in that year and a half.
I mean, you could really say that he's making up for lost time. Because at this point, he's still probably spent more time in prison than as a free man.
Oh, substantially. So the two showed up at Spawn Ranch around noon. Charles was excited to see everyone there and figured happy faces and a whole lot of love would greet him. He was wrong.
The women took him aside and told him about Bobby's arrest. According to Charles, the women then came up with a plan. Since Bobby was in custody, the police would have to let him go if murders similar to this happened while he was locked up.
Sadie explained that they had written political piggies on the wall, and that if someone did this at another murder scene, the police wouldn't suspect Bobby anymore. She also explained that if they wrote the words Helter Skelter on the wall this time, police would believe that the murder was racially motivated.
No one else on the planet Earth at this point has linked the words Helter Skelter to apocalyptic race war.
That's just it.
Only them. So they're assuming that everyone else knows about this crazy conspiracy that's happening.
Well, the thing to remember is, like, we talk about how they're on drugs this whole time, but they are on a lot of hallucinogens. And that kind of thing is going to mess with your mind.
Yeah, if you're not using that kind of high, powerful, mind altering substance, like if you're not doing it properly and safely and with moderation, you are just going to scramble your brains like eggs.
Oh, absolutely.
After this conversation, Charles went into the house where he found Tex. He was stoned out of his gourd and on an old couch, tapping his feet to music that was playing only in his head. He greeted Charles and the two talked about Bobby's arrest. Tex had heard about the plan and was totally on board.
Charles Manson claims that he was adamantly against it for the sole fact that he didn't want to end up behind bars again. Every time he tried to talk the group out of it, they used his own words against him and reminded him that they were one and they had to stick together and save Bobby. This is apparently when Charles said the words,
"Now is the time for Helter Skelter."
When he left this conversation, he was greeted by Stephanie, who eagerly asked which house her and Charles were going to live in.
Oh, girl.
Oh, I know. She was under the impression that the two were going to be in a monogamous relationship, and he told her that first they needed to make love in every single house, and then they would pick the one that she liked the most for themselves. And this worked. She was happy with the solution.
However, if you listen to her testimony, things were not all that great. Shortly after this, Charles hit her.
He's a volatile little dude. I'm not surprised.
Oh my god, little man syndrome to a T.
Now, that night, he went to talk to Lynette about the plan. She greeted him and told him that she had a weird feeling, but that things would be clear in about an hour or so. It's ominous.
Well, like, girl, do you just have, like, bad gas and that's a feeling? Or are you like, my friends are about to commit some murders?
Right? Yeah. I mean, she's like, something's up. I don't know what, Charlie.
Yeah. That feeling is anxiety and stress.
Yes.
After he left, he saw Tex walking around and the two had another talk. This time, he told him the following.
It's time to get something done for Bobby. The girls are ready to do whatever is necessary. They don't have a plan or a place picked out, so it looks like it's going to be pretty much up to you. But I think it would be best to hit some of the rich pigs' places. Get some bolt cutters or something you can cut a phone wire or gate chain with. You know what else you need, so put it all together and get going.
Tex responded by saying that his mind wasn't working right.
Again, because he's stoned to the nines at this point.
Oh, he is orbiting at this point. Charles told him to find one of the houses of very rich people, similar to where Terry Melcher lived, and to totally destroy everyone. He instructed them to make it as gruesome as possible.
Right before they left, Charles stopped them and said,
"Leave a sign. You girls know what to write. Something witchy."
Like we mentioned earlier, Charles was not there at the house when the murders took place. However, even he admits that without him, this wouldn't have happened. In Manson, in his own words, he wrote,
"I felt Tex had forced the Crow incident on me, and that act had put us up against a wall of fear and paranoia that was reflected in all the changes that had happened since. As for Hinman, even though I had lifted a hand against him, in my present frame of mind, it was easy to lay the blame on the three who had botched a simple job going to the guy for money. I felt that these two incidents were more behind the direction the old Ford was headed than any beliefs of Charles Manson. I hadn't twisted any arms, I wasn't sitting behind anyone with a gun next to their head giving directions, yet I can't deny making some of the suggestions that led to the events of that night. Nor can I deny that I was the one person who could have prevented that car from leaving Spawn Ranch. But so goes the feeling of power when coupled with hatred."
20 minutes later, Tex left with Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel. They headed to 11050 Cielo Drive, a house that was once occupied by Melcher, and they expected to find him.
The crazy thing is that Linda had only been with the group for a month at that point. They chose her to join with them because she was one of the only members with a valid driver's license, and they needed someone to get them there and didn't want the risk of being pulled over.
Rather than Melcher, present in the house was actress Sharon Tate, who was 26 years old. She was also 8.5 months pregnant. Known for her beauty, she had appeared in movies such as Eye of the Devil.
Sharon Tate was probably the best known of all of the victims.
Everyone knows who Sharon Tate was.
Absolutely. And I will say, she was married to Roman Polanski at the time. She was pregnant with his child. Not a great human being overall himself, in my opinion. Pretty nasty. However, I will say he was fucking devastated.
He was. The thing I find kind of interesting, and I don't know if you feel the same way, they had this aspect about make it witchy, make it evil, whatever. A lot of the movies that she had starred in were very dark. You have Eye of the Devil. She had another one that was about vampires and all of this dark stuff. So the fact that she was in these darker films, they didn't know that she was going to be there. So this wasn't planned.
Oh man, we've seen it before where celebrities have been targeted, whether it be by stalkers or what have you. She was so famous, and yet this was completely coincidental.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with her or indeed anybody else who was in that house that night.
They didn't even know who she was at that point.
No, they didn't.
Fun fact that a lot of people don't know about her was that she was also apparently quite skilled at martial arts and was even friends with Bruce Lee.
During her time on the set of Eye of the Devil, she made an impression on the cast and crew. Her role wasn't huge, but her performance was considered important for the overall feel of the film.
A huge coincidence here is that one of the major subjects of that movie is cults, which is interesting considering that people obviously refer to the Manson family as one.
It was also around this time that she actually met her husband, Roman Polanski, who obviously they would later get married. Roman was not there that fateful night because he was in Europe working on a movie. This is still something that haunts him to this day.
And Roman Polanski is still alive. He is 90 years old, and he's had quite the life since all of this happened. His past and his present is riddled with sexual assault allegations and a ton of legal drama.
Yeah, like I said, not a great person. Kind of involves lots and lots of pedophilia.
In fact, he was sued just last month by a woman who claims that he assaulted her while she was underage back in the 70s, and he is set to appear in court in 2025.
Dang, did not know that.
Yeah, I found that out while I was looking into this episode. I was like, damn, he is still getting himself in trouble.
I can't believe that. It seems so awful that she met her end that way. Sharon Tate met her end that way, and he was still a shitbag.
Yeah.
Awful.
It's really sad that he lost Sharon Tate in such a terrible way, but honestly, I'm going to go ahead and say he is not a good person. We're not going to go too deep into his crimes because that's honestly its own episode right there, but just look him up. Like, he's been busy.
Oh yeah, there's already documentaries about him out there. But all that to say, Sharon was very happy with her new home on Cielo Drive. It was far enough away from Hollywood that it afforded them the privacy that she wanted for her unborn child. The property was surrounded by fencing and a locked gate to ensure security and safety, or so she thought.
The irony of all of this is that the seclusion of the house would be one of the reasons it was chosen as the site of the murders.
Another person present at the house that night was 35-year-old Jay Sebring. He was best known for being a hairstylist with a star-studded clientele. He had a romantic past with Tate, and the two had remained very close until their deaths.
He loved her very, very much, and he would ultimately die defending her.
A good friend of Roman Polanski's was 32-year-old Wojciech Frykowski, who was also at the house with his longtime girlfriend, Abigail Folger. And yes, that is Abigail Folger, heiress of the Folger coffee family.
They were all there to spend time with Sharon, who was lonely due to her husband being gone.
Caretaker William Garrettson was only 19 years old and was also there along with his 18-year-old friend, Stephen Parent. They were not directly with the rest, but they were present on the property. Stephen worked at an electronics store and was there to sell William a radio.
Interesting little fact, Quincy Jones was apparently supposed to be there that night, but he changed his mind at the last minute, which ultimately saved his life.
Again, this whole incident, the Manson family, Charles Manson himself, they affected so many people's lives, even just by association.
And the thing that's really sad is when you look into the effects of Sharon Tate's death on Hollywood. You have all of these quotes from these celebrities that we both know very well. Like, we've heard of them, we're familiar with their work, and they were all deeply affected by this murder.
Yes, absolutely. And like we said, she was 26 years old.
Yeah.
A baby, having
Really?
a baby.
Yep.
Oh my God. There are, as we know, a few renditions of what exactly happened that night. We'll get into that and more when we cover the trial.
Tex had been to the house at least once when Terry Melcher had lived there, so he was somewhat familiar with the property. When they arrived, it was shortly after midnight. They parked the car and Tex got out. He climbed a telephone pole that was near the locked gate and cut the phone line to ensure those inside couldn't call for help.
Something we want to remind you all before we do go any further into this is that they were all on a huge amount of drugs at this point. You think they would have thought, okay, big plan's coming, let's sober up, let's be tactical about this. No, they were all still off their fucking rockers.
I think they got higher.
Probably.
They're like, let's go. We got to get ramped up for this.
I think it makes it even more terrifying when you think about it, because you can't reason with these people.
No.
They're fucking loony.
The group waited near the gate. They were worried that it would be armed or electrified, so they climbed some trees and they all jumped over it.
Stephen Parent was getting ready to leave, and he walked up to the gate and pressed the button to open it. He was met with Tex Watson, who was standing there holding a .22 revolver and a large hunting knife. The women were in the bushes hiding.
He was obviously terrified, and he began to beg for his life. He tried to convince Tex not to hurt him by saying that he wouldn't tell anyone that he saw him on the property, but Tex did not listen to his pleas.
In an attempt to defend himself, he raised his hands only to be cut so hard that the tendons in his hands were completely severed. Tex then shot him 4 times, killing him.
The group then waited to see if anyone had been alerted by the shots. To their surprise, it seemed that no one had heard them, so they continued on.
The women rose up from the bushes. Linda began to search for an open window. Tex cut the screen of a window that he had found and instructed Linda to wait near the gate and keep an eye out for anyone else showing up. She made her way to Stephen's vehicle and waited there.
Meanwhile, Susan and Patricia were led into the house by Tex, who had gone in and opened the front door.
Everyone in the house was sound asleep. They had spent their evening hanging out and enjoying each other's company after going for dinner at one of the hot spots in the area.
They ate at a place called El Coyote, which is still around. It was also used in the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was known to be a favorite of celebrities, including Jane Fonda, Shirley Temple, and even John Wayne.
Wojciech was on the couch when they arrived. He was the first to wake up when he heard the sound of whispering all around him. Still half asleep and thinking that it was his friends, he asked what time it was.
Tex pointed the gun at his face and demanded that he be quiet. When asked who he was, Tex responded with the words,
"I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work."
That's scary.
I think a home invasion is probably one of the worst experiences anyone could ever imagine going through. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my worst fear, but the idea of waking up and having a strange person in the room with me, terrifying.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot before. To me, the idea of someone breaking into your house, like your safe space, and killing you just because you're unlucky enough to be there is beyond horrifying. I think of these crimes, but I also think of movies like The Strangers, where they ask the killers why they chose them, and they just say, "You were home."
Lock your windows and doors, guys. It really makes all the difference sometimes.
It does. I mean, it's sheer horrific luck that results in the end of your life. And just thinking about that, it makes me so uncomfortable. When I was working on this part of the script, I had one of the windows wide open, like right there where we are. And I had my back turned to it. And all I could think about was like, they could come right in if they wanted to.
No.
And then I closed the window.
A couple of the girls that I work with are looking for new apartments right now, and they're both single ladies, and one of the big things is they will not accept a first floor apartment.
I don't blame them.
I don't either. I have lived in a first floor apartment, but I was very lucky. I had Cody with me, but I think as a single woman I would.
No, absolutely not. No. Meanwhile, Susan and Patricia had been instructed by Tex to go through the house and find the other occupants. They brought Sharon and Jay to the living room where they were tied up with rope the group had brought with them.
Susan walked upstairs and found Abigail stirring in bed. She woke up and greeted her, possibly thinking that she was a friend of Jay's who had come to visit late that night.
Susan would later say,
"It was the funniest thing. It was like the lady almost expected me to be there. She glanced at me and said, 'Hi.' So I waved at her and said, 'Hi' back. Then I went on past her room until I came to another door. Looking in, I saw a pregnant lady laying on the bed. She was beautiful, Charlie. You would have loved her." Fuck you, dude.
Oh my god.
Ugh.
Oh, I hate them. I hate them so much. All of them. In the living room, ropes were placed around their necks and thrown over a beam, and you can still see the rope hanging from the ceiling in the crime scene photos. Jay began to beg them to go easy on the very pregnant Sharon Tate, which just angered Tex more, so he shot him to get him to stop.
Jay asked what they wanted from them, which Tex replied,
"You have to die to save my brother."
Meanwhile, Abigail Folger was taken back to her room where her purse was. She gave them the $70 she had with her, thinking that it was simply a robbery and that they'd leave if they just got what they wanted. When they brought her back to the living room, Jay was on the floor and groaning. He was stabbed 7 times.
Tex then ordered Patricia to tie up Wojciech with a towel and turn off all the lights in the house, leaving the group in almost total darkness. Wojciech was able to free himself, and a struggle began between him and Susan Atkins. She cut his legs with her knife, but he was able to momentarily fight her off. He made his way out of the door and onto the front porch, but was stopped by Tex.
Tex Watson hit him over the head with the gun multiple times and stabbed him over and over again. He then shot him twice.
Linda, who was still waiting at the vehicle, walked up to the driveway after hearing what she would later describe as horrifying sounds. She would testify in court that she attempted to frighten the group into stopping by saying that someone was coming and they would get caught.
It did not work. She yelled at them to stop, but Susan turned to her and simply said,
"It's too late."
Meanwhile, at the house, Abigail Folger had escaped the clutches of the group and ran to the pool area. She was followed by Patricia, and the two ran onto the front lawn. She was tackled to the ground. Abigail would be stabbed a total of 28 times by both Patricia and Tex.
In later interviews, Patricia would state that Abigail Folger's last words were,
"This part breaks my heart."
Oh my god, seriously.
Every
I had
time.
this moment when I was working on this script where I'm like, I am so glad I'm not on my period right now because I would be bawling my
brutal.
eyes out.
Abigail Folger simply said, "I'm already dead. Stop. I'm already dead. Stop. I'm already dead."
It's horrible.
Oh, and they were all so young.
They were. And I mean, they were just a group of friends who came by to spend time with their pregnant friend.
Because she was lonely. She was like, "Hey guys, my husband's out of town. Come have a sleepover. It'll be fun."
And they had been house sitting for them. And so Sharon was like, "Hey, now that we're back, why don't you guys stay a few extra nights with me?" And they were like, "Absolutely."
Yeah, of course, because who wouldn't want to hang out with Sharon Tate in her beautiful big Hollywood house?
Exactly. Wojciech, still alive, struggled to make his way across the lawn and away from the house. Tex found him and killed him. He would later be found with a total of 51 stab wounds across his body.
They would later say that the more the victims struggled, the more violent they were towards them.
I did that thing again where I'm doing research and I make the mistake of looking at crime scene photos.
Oh, they're seductive. You want to look, but you really don't want
to look.
Right,
because I'm like, the thing is, I was looking at, I wanted to just read the reports.
I think, you know what, I will say, when I do look at crime scene photos, I'm not looking at them out of a gruesome sense of curiosity. It's more to help kind of visualize how this happened, how we hear the story, but then to actually see the visual of what happened is a whole other thing.
When you look at his photos that the coroner took, he is riddled with stab wounds. Like you look at it and at first your mind kind of takes a second to figure out what you're seeing because the body's been cleaned up, right?
Yes.
And then you see all of these just splotches all over his body, and it's like, those are from a knife.
I can't imagine. Not a very quick way to go by any means. Oh, At this point, Sharon Tate is still alive and in the house. She begged the group to let her live long enough to have her baby, even if that meant being taken hostage. It's still unknown who would be the one to kill her. Tex Watson had admitted to it, but at one point, Susan Atkins told various cellmates that it was her.
Sharon Tate was stabbed a total of 16 times. Tex would later say that she died begging for her mother. And we've talked about Charles and his group being, again, this wacky bunch who lived on a ranch and they're just a group of hippies having fun. But these murders, they're beyond violent. Like, violent isn't a strong enough word. And something we've discussed before is how personal of a murder stabbing someone is, because you're not just shooting them and walking away. You're up
No.
close and personal.
Yes.
And they look these people in the eye as they stab them 7, 16, 28, and 51 times. Like, that is an obscene amount. That's more than just murder. It's pure rage. Like, these people are monsters.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Too, I know they were off their rockers. Their minds were Swiss cheese at this point. But how can you do that? They were young. There was a pregnant woman, for fuck's sakes. They all struggled. They all begged for their lives. Disgusting. There's special place in hell for you assholes.
And to say also, the more they begged, the more violent we wanted to be.
Like, oh, there are demons on this earth. And let me tell you, there was a few in the fucking Manson family.
Oh, absolutely.
It is said that one of the reasons for the large amount of stab wounds was because Charles Manson allegedly told Tex to ensure each of the women was heavily involved in the murders. It's likely that many of the wounds were inflicted after each victim was killed because Tex passed the knife around to each one of them and had them stab them further.
The group took a look around at the carnage they had created and decided their work was done. Susan Atkins, remembering Charles's demands, took the towel that they used on Wojciech and wrote the word pig on the door using Sharon Tate's blood.
The initial plan was to leave the victims hanging from the ceiling, but they decided against it because, and this is true, they were too tired.
Yeah, it's hard work viciously murdering a house full of people.
Oh my god. Yeah, and then just like that, they just drove off. The group changed into clean clothes, leaving their bloody belongings in nearby hills along with their weapons, and set to return to Spawn Ranch.
At one point, they stopped at a random house where they used a hose to clean themselves off, only to be chased by the owner while his wife yelled at them to leave.
Can you imagine waking up in the morning as this person who was just using, or they caught them using this hone.
Mm-hmm.
They think, oh, that's fucking weird. They were just like some weirdos, whatever. And then you turn on the TV or turn on the radio and you're like, oh my God.
What's even worse than that is they said that when they were murdering Wojciech, when he was screaming, not too far away from where the house was, there was a group of like Girl Guides basically out camping, and they heard screaming and they didn't know what it was, and it was him screaming as he was being killed.
Oh my, Girl Guides.
Yeah, just a group of like little girls on a camping trip.
Whoa, that is absolutely brutal. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Charles was waiting for the group to return. He eventually saw the headlights of their car as it pulled into the driveway. He writes,
Sadie was the first one out of the car. She was beaming with excitement as she ran up to me and threw her arms around my neck, saying, "Oh, Charlie, we did it. I took my life for you." "Girl," I said, taking her arms from around my neck, "what you did for yourself. What you've done is lock me to you." I pulled away from her and walked towards the car. Tex was getting out and favoring his leg. My first thought was that he had been wounded, but he had only bruised his foot while kicking one of the victims. He was glassy-eyed and grinning, and while not as high as Sadie, he was not suffering from remorse. On the contrary, other than his limp, he was moving around with an air of arrogance. We clasped hands and exchanged a brotherly hug.
This is sickening. It's like they're Vikings returning from like
pillaging.
Well, they literally have like pillaged.
They're proud of it. There's a number of things that makes me really loathe Tex Watson. I mentioned his website a bit last week, but he has a page that is in memory of the victims where he lists their names in front of like this peaceful looking background. And then later he pushes one of his books that you can buy.
Oh my God, I'm at a loss for words. That is so fucking vile. I know I'm swearing a lot, you guys, but it's disgusting.
You should be upset, though. This is upsetting.
I don't... How is he allowed to do that?
It's crazy. Honestly, I don't want to give him more credit than he deserves and more attention than he deserves. The site, though, is called aboundinglove.org, and it is a sack of full-blown, rotten, stupid bullshit.
I think it must be the only way he can continue to live with himself, is to deluding himself into thinking that he's now this godly preacher, but it's like, there's no coming back from what you did, motherfucker.
And speaking of his delusion, he writes...
True biblical forgiveness is humanly impossible for my self-centered actions in the 60s. Without any expectations, I deeply regret and apologize for the deaths, pain, and suffering I have caused to all those devastated because of my rebellious choices. In some small way, it is my hope that these living amends will be a healing balm to the multitudes looking for answers.
Rebellious choices.
Rebellious choices?
Rebellious choices is when I got my lip pierced when I was in junior high.
Yeah, exactly. It's going, it's not a phase, Mom, when you wear black lipstick for the first time. Viciously murdering several people is not a rebellious choice. Oh, my God.
And that's the thing that makes me so mad about him, is how delusional he is. I don't believe for a second, not one single second, that he has an iota of remorse for what he did.
No, absolutely not. He's just upset that there was consequences to his actions, and obviously rightly so, but good lord, the white man audacity stinks from this man.
It really does. But back to Charles.
Linda and Patricia weren't feeling very well, and they told Charles they wanted to go lay down. He ended up talking with Susan and Tex about how things had played out. He would later say,
"A normal person would find the details of the night's events shocking and horrifying. But I had long ago stopped measuring myself by society's standards. The story I was hearing from Tex and Sadie did not shock me. I did not feel pity or compassion for the victims. My only concern was whether it resembled the Hinman killing. Would the police now have reason to believe that Bobby was not the slayer of Hinman? And were the kids, loaded with drugs, clever enough to avoid leaving prints or evidence of their identities? Knowing Sadie and Tex and their flair for dramatic exaggeration, I doubted the slayings went down as they described. Most importantly, did they leave a trail that would lead to the ranch? Concerns for clues compelled me to get into the Ford and head for Bel Air. I took another member of our circle with me."
People say that the suspects always return to the scene of the crime, and this was certainly the case here. Charles wanted to see things for himself.
As they approached the house, he was relieved to see no police presence anywhere in the area. They went to the car where Stephen Parent's body was. Charles wiped the scene of any fingerprints without paying much attention to the man inside.
They continued to wipe the house down of any evidence they found as they made their way through the bloody scene. At first, Charles wanted to hang the bodies as the group had originally intended, but the reality of the scenario quickly hit him and he decided against it.
All of this took less than an hour and a half, and before long, he was back at the ranch and getting into bed with Stephanie.
When he awoke the following morning, the murders were all over the news. When Charles saw who the victims were and how rich they had been, he became angry at the group for not bringing home any cash.
Later broadcasts talked about drugs being found in the home that belonged to the victims. Charles, upon hearing that they didn't bring him any of those, became even more annoyed with the group.
You can see he really has his priorities in check here.
That following night, the group, along with Charles Manson, Leslie Van Houten, and Clem Grogan, went for a drive and found themselves at 3301 Waverly Drive, which would ultimately be the site of their second murder spree.
And that is where we will pick up again next week. How are you feeling? Because I'm feeling freaking depressed.
Me too.
Oh my
Honestly,
God.
it's a big story and it's a lot. And I think with this case, it's so easy to think about the beginning and the end and not the middle, not the murders, because you know that obviously these people died. But thinking about the details of these crimes, and we're going to get to the other spree next week, but just thinking about how absolutely vile and violent and animalistic it was.
Yeah, if there was any shred of humanity left in these people, it died on the way to that house.
Yeah.
You know, frick, it's just, this story has such a build up, right? And when it goes bang, it goes bang. And for all of Charles's entire life has basically culminated to this point, and then it's over in 2 nights. Do you know what I mean? And then after that, the trial is then stretched out, right? So it's like this huge period of build up, boom, and then this long period up until his death, basically.
And then keep in mind, again, he's only been out of jail for 1.5 years.
And mass murder is basically happening. Like, holy shit.
They should have kept him in jail.
That judge wanted to keep him in jail.
Yeah.
Should have. Woo! We got a long way to go still. Like we said at the beginning, this is going to be our longest series that we've done to date. And as much as the subject matter is heavy as shit, we hope you are enjoying it and perhaps learning something about the case you didn't know already.
It's always so weird to say that we hope you enjoy this content, but you know what we mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point, if you're here, you're listening, you've stuck with us.
Yeah.
We're like-minded people.
Yeah, you get it.
You get it. You get it. We want to hear your thoughts on the series, obviously. So email us, thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com. You can leave us a YouTube comment if that's where you're listening.
We've been posting some Charles Manson interviews on our social media, so make sure you check those out because there's something else. And one of them got us in trouble on TikTok.
Oh no!
We got a warning.
Aww.
For oh my god, what was it? Radicalized speech or something like that was the reason they gave me.
I mean, we're posting it purely for educational and entertainment purposes, but I could see where the algorithm perhaps thought that it might have been slightly radical.
Yes, absolutely.
But rest assured, we are not posting it because we agree or like him.
No, we want to just remind you all how batshit psycho crazy he was.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, if you do want to watch all of our well, I shouldn't say all of them. We just started at 100, but we're already on our way. If you want to see our beautiful, shining, happy faces, we are over on Patreon.
Yes. We're not feeling very shiny and happy after this episode, though.
No.
I wore like extra flowers today because I felt so depressed after writing this episode. I was like, fake it till you make it, baby. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Oh my goodness. Okay, but seriously, I did mention Patreon. If you want to see us over there, patreon.com/thegrimcurriculum, or just search The Grim Curriculum. That's basically where we are on everything. You can support us for as little as $3 Canadian per month. All proceeds go towards the podcast and keeping this little ship running.
And speaking of Patreon, it's time to say a huge thank you to our wonderful, glorious, fantabulous Grim VIPs and up. And I always say the thank you, so Charlotte, have at her.
All right. Humongo thank yous to Lisa, Atlantean Jedi, Bob, Brian, Hillary, Judy, Kevinicus Musicus, and Mayhem Mudkip.
We love you. We do.
Sure do.
You're awesome.
All right. I don't think we have anything else to talk about today. We had our little chat in the beginning about the infamous OJ.
The juice is no longer on the loose, man.
Nope, he is in the ground, or will be at some point, I would imagine.
And like I said, that's a case we're going to cover eventually, especially now that there really is a solid conclusion to it.
Yeah, speaking of juice, that is a juicy case.
It is.
Alrighty, well, all that being said, thank you so much for listening, everybody. This has been
The Grim Curriculum.
And it is my turn for a fun fact, and I actually have one for you this time.
Oh, I hope it's happy.
Oh, I don't know if it is.
Okay.
But there was a bacteria study on belly buttons, and of the 60 belly buttons sampled, 2,368 different species of bacteria was found. The study indicated that 1,400 of them may have been new to science. One had a rare bacteria found only in Japanese soil, and the particular person had never been to Japan. 2 had rare bacteria that thrived on ice caps and thermal vents, and not a single bacteria was common to all belly buttons.
Oh my god, our belly buttons are a wasteland.
Yeah, you better clean out your lint trap.
Oh, that's so gross. I hate it.
Bye.
Bye.